Welcome to LINER Notes. My name is David Bixler. Trumpet player Derrick Gardner recently retired from his position at the University of Manitoba in order to move back to Chicago and focus on playing. But instead he found himself as the head of jazz studies at Northwestern University. In this episode of LINER Notes, Derrick explains how that happened, as well as sharing some of the details about his life-changing trip to Africa that transformed him as a person and gave birth to his latest record, Pan-Africa, with the Jazz Prophets. Derrick Gardner, welcome to LINER Notes. Good afternoon. Thank you for making time for speaking with us today.
My pleasure, man. It's a pleasure to be with you once again, and looking forward to this.
Okay, cool. First, you were just mentioning you are still in boxes, you're unpacking, and you recently moved back to Chicago after how many years in Manitoba?
10 years. 10 years in a block of ice. Yeah. I wasn't, although I haven't lived in Chicago since the late 70s, when my family was here, and then my parents both got jobs in music. They both got their PhDs in music, and then they both got university jobs in Virginia, and we moved the whole family to Virginia, and then I went to high school and college there, then went out into the world, and then eventually went to Canada, taught up there, and then when my father got sick, my father's a jazz trumpeter, composer, arranger, and been in Chicago for decades. And when he got sick, I was the only one of his children that had the freedom of movement to be able to go back and forth between Canada and Chicago. And then when he had passed, then I decided to make the move back to Chicago. And so I moved into his house, and so it's been a little over a year, and been kind of unpacking the whole time.
Waiting for that motivation. I hear you. So you left your job at Manitoba. You thought you were retired, and then now you are head of jazz studies at Northwestern University. How did that come about?
About maybe 3 weeks before classes were to start at Northwestern, Victor Goings, who was the director of jazz studies there for about 14, 15 years or so, he resigned, and he had another employment opportunity in St. Louis at Jazz St. Louis, which he's there now as the CEO of that organization. So Northwestern was kind of left in a pickle of sorts, to find somebody, but they didn't want to look outside of the city, and so they used a couple of headhunters to kind of find somebody, and word got around that I was back in town, and so I was contacted by one of those guys, the headhunters, and then contacted by the dean, and we hit it off, and they said, "Okay, you're hired," and so I came on board, and so yeah, I thought I was retired. I really did, and that was like a mindset. I was like, okay, I'm retired. I'm gonna jump into this thing here and get this happening. But then when this opportunity at Northwestern came for me, it was a chance for me to direct a program, which I had never done, and so I'm having a ball. It's really a wonderful school, and a lot of great students as well.
How are you finding that transition from being what I imagine was primarily trumpet professor up to being in charge of everything, admin, budgets, etc.?
Oh, that's a haze. It's budgets, deadlines, making sure you're on top of communicating with the right people and following the protocols and learning the machinery of that particular institution, and so that's been quite the thing to deal with, but not impossible. Once you got it, then you got it, and so I've had a lot of assistance, and huge help to me has been my coordinator, the guy who was the coordinator of jazz studies, who was also a saxophonist, and was on the scene back in the day in New York. He's from Queens, and this guy lived around the corner from Lucky Thompson and was friends with and studied with Joe Anderson.
Whoa.
Bernard Scavella, and he's a bad cat, and he got like three records out and all this stuff, and works around Chicago, and worked very closely with Victor over the years. And Victor hired him as the coordinator, and he knew all the ropes, and so he has been teaching me everything I needed to know.
Making that transition smooth.
Oh my goodness, yeah, he's been invaluable.
Question for you. It's pretty well known amongst jazz musicians, the difference in level of support between Canada and U.S., and we'll get to that. But you notice a difference in support in jazz education between where you were in Manitoba and then at Northwestern?
In jazz education, the support?
Yes. Yeah, both within like the institution, at large, and then also just financially.
Financially, it's very good in Canada. There's a lot of financial support educationally within academia, but it's set up differently. Most of the universities in Canada are subsidized federally, and so, for instance, at University of Manitoba, where I taught, tuition is like $5,000 a year Canadian. So U.S., that's about maybe $3,500 a year, something like that, And so, man, anybody can afford to make that tuition, per year. And on top of that, they get scholarships, And so you damn near go to school free, and they have the music facilities that they had there at University of Manitoba were excellent. So, and then they have tons of support professionally that's supported federally. They have these these Canadian artist grants that are available locally within each city, like in the city of Winnipeg. They have the Manitoba Arts Council, Manitoba Film and Music, and then provincially, I guess that would cover provincially as well. You have the Winnipeg Arts Council locally. Then federally, you have Canada Council of the Arts, and you have an entity called Factor Foundation supporting artists and something T on record, something like that. Yeah.
Anonymous acronym.
Yeah, right. And these are federal grants. And so, for instance, for the big band record that I did back in 2020, I got about $85,000 to do a big band record, and it covered everything. It covered touring, the production of the record, pre-production, post-production of the record, publicity, the whole 9 yards, And so, yeah, there's tons of support, and they make it very easy. You don't have to. You have to be like your name doesn't have to be up in lights in order to get this support, So yeah, Canada got it going on in that regard.
Even though that you're in Chicago teaching at Northwestern, you're still eligible for the Canadian funds.
Yes, because I am a Canadian permanent resident, and so my permanent residency allows for me to be able to still have access to those artist grants. And so the Pan Africa project was done while I was still living in Canada, and then during the course of the post-production of that project, that's when I made the move to Chicago. But I still go back and forth to Canada to work. I'm a member of a group called a couple of new groups. One of the Canadian Jazz Collective, which is a 7-piece group, and another called the Canadian National Jazz Orchestra, which is kind of positioning themselves to be like the National Jazz Orchestra of Canada, basically. And so I go back and forth working with those groups quite a bit. And so yeah, the Pan Africa was funded by Canada Council of the Arts, Factor Foundation, assisting Canadian Talent on Record. That's the acronym. Okay, it just came to me right there. And Manitoba Film and Music, they also funded the recording as well.
So you're going to be taking this band and this project back.
Yeah, exactly. We're doing a West African tour.
All right. So when is that happening?
That is slated to happen late July, early August.
This year. Okay.
Encompass the countries of Ghana, Sierra Leone, Senegal, and Cameroon.
Oh, man. That sounds great. And now, is that also supported by the Canadian government and these grants?
Yes. And I've also discovered a couple of U.S.-based grants as well that I'm going to be trying to access. But so far, the bulk of the support is coming from the touring element of those Canadian grants.
All right. So let's jump into this music. You spent considerable amount of time there prepping for this 5 weeks, I read. And maybe just talk about your experience there and how that manifested itself in the music that you wrote and then performed with your band.
Sure. Well, I went there while I was on sabbatical from University of Manitoba. And I spent 5 weeks in Ghana, and I was totally thrown into West African culture and Ghanaian culture, which included their music culture as well. And so I learned incredible information about the transatlantic slave trade, information that is not taught to you in school and in books. If it is, it's taught on a very small level. And I started to become familiar with this as I was teaching jazz history at University of Manitoba, and I found that jazz history is inextricably linked to American history and to African history, and particularly West African history, as captured Africans were transported to the colonies in the West, bringing with them that West African musical culture. So, in essence, jazz was seeded from these African cultures in America and harvested. When it was harvested, it came out in the form of field hollers, work songs, which after emancipation morphed into the blues, as these freed slaves now had movement around the country, and those work songs and field hollers became more sophisticated in the form of the blues, and so which morphed into jazz and so forth, so on. So that became incredibly clear to me once I visited Cape Coast Slave Dungeon, Elmina Slave Dungeon, right on the coast, on the Ghanaian coasts, and you saw how. And also Asan Manso, which is known as the Slave River. There's these two veins of river that meet at Asan Manso, which is about 50 miles or so from Cape Coast and Elmina Slave Dungeons. And so got to see the whole, how the transatlantic slave trade was a very sophisticated economic machine where these Africans were captured, and they were within maybe about a 300-400 mile radius of Asan Manso. They were marched to Asan Manso, to where they got to this river, and they took their last bath. And that was the name of the track, one of the tracks on my record, Asan Manso, The Last Bath. And they took their last bath, and the tour guide had me bathe in the river in the same manner as these captured Africans, man, it just brought you to tears, man. And then once you climb out of the river onto the shore, it's a forested area, and that's where these representatives from European slave trading companies were there at the mouth of that river, where they bidded on these captured Africans, and they were branded with their company's insignia there on the.
Man.
It's deep, man. Oh, it was. I mean, and so then they were marched another 40, 50 miles to these slave dungeons where they awaited the slave ships to come, and they were, put onto these ships. And so this went way beyond any information I learned in school, and you got a sense of the machinery that was in place and the how well oiled this machine was. So this was the wholesale into the wholesale part of the transatlantic slave trade. And once they got to the colonies, that was the retail part of it. And when they bidded on these captured Africans, and then once they were taken to their respective slave owners' plantations, rebranded with their insignia. So man, that was the inspiration for that, along with learning about people like Kwame Nkrumah, who was the first prime minister and president of Ghana when they gained their independence in 1957, and his whole story, and many other figures in Ghanaian history that I learned about that were a part of that whole trip. And so that fueled the inspiration for this recording.
Oh, that's amazing. Leaves me rather speechless. The depravity and inhumanity is pretty large there, to say the least. One question is, in you being there and hanging with musicians, were there certain things musically that made sense to you as a jazz musician, that you had a new ear, like your ear was open to, oh, this is where this comes from, maybe, something that you picked up from records in just in your maturation as a musician, like having your feet planted there. Did you make a connection with the music in a way that you hadn't before?
Oh yes, most definitely. One of the first things that hit me was this music, a genre of music there called high life. And then Afro beats is like the more modern day version of high life music. And in high life music, there's a clave, 3/2 clave that we hear in Afro-Cuban music. And so, and I was hip to this when I was teaching jazz history, and I was explaining about the people of the Yoruba tribe, or the demographic of people called Yoruban. And I was playing examples of their music, and they had this 3/2 clave that is known in Afro-Cuban music. So I'm like, wait a minute now. So okay, the Nigeria, there was a British colony, but they sold these captured Africans to anybody, including people in the planters in the Spanish colonies, such as Cuba. A whole lot of Yorubans that are in Cuba and that brought that musical culture there. And so, but it was based, but West African music, it has a lot of triplet figures in it. Don't take it, don't take the go take the bone, like that. And then, but the European influence that was present in Cuba at that time was more straight. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, you know. And so that's how it's straightened out, you know, because of the European influence. But that specific clave is African, and that knocked me over, man, because I'd never even thought of that clave as being African. I knew it had African influence, but I didn't know where it come from. When I made that connection, and matter of fact, we did a piece on my record that titled High Life Suite, written by a pianist that I collaborated with over there named Victor Day. And we were, I was playing with him at the jazz club there in Accra called the Plus 233 Jazz Bar and Grill. 233 is the country code of Ghana. And so I'm playing there with him, and he said, "Yeah, we'll just play on this tune, man. It's called the High Life Suite." So we playing it, and I'm like, "Man, this is a bad tune, man." And so, but I'm noticing the drummers going tat 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 tat. I was like, "Man, what is this?" So yeah, it was. So that was one of the big things that really hit me there, you know, and inspired me to record his tune on my record. And another thing that I did was I went to a Ghanaian funeral, and there was, at that funeral was they had a Ghanaian percussion group made up of about 6 to 8 percussionists, and it was very, very polyrhythmic, and had all the stuff happening. And the doorbell ring. It had all this stuff happening, and I'm sure you've heard this type of group before, but I had never seen like an authentic version of it in Africa. I said, "Oh man, let me check this out." So they're doing all this stuff, and it was this particular thing they were doing was and they had the different varieties of drums, the higher pitched drums and the lower pitched drums. And I wasn't familiar with the lower pitched drums. So I'm able to take all this in. And I said, I want to write a tune that incorporates that with the swing beat, because it was there. That I was like, oh, okay, yeah, I see what we can do. That can be easily melded in, because that's the swing beat anyways, built off of that triplet feel. And so I did that with a piece on my record called The Sixth Village. And I was so fortunate to have a drummer that understood all that this West African musical culture, and he came up playing djembe instead of playing jazz drums first. That came second. And he was actually, I got to tell you a funny story about this. I'm trying to put all this stuff together in Ghana on my first trip, and I want to perform, do all this stuff, and I know nobody in Ghana. And so I found out that there's a chapter of my fraternity, Omega Psi Phi fraternity, that is in Accra. I said, oh, okay, I'll call them. So boom, I get in touch with somebody there, and said, oh, you need to talk. And I explained what I'm doing. And I said, oh, you need to talk to our one of our chapter members, Diallo Sombri. I said, okay, cool. So I'm talking to him. I'm thinking that he's Ghanaian, and turns out he's American. He's from Jersey. Years ago, and he's kind of a promoter of sorts. And so I'm explaining things to him, this, that, and the other, blah, blah, blah. I'm still thinking that he's Ghanaian. And so he says, you put your band together? I said, no, I haven't put it together yet, but I got a bass player I'm gonna use, but I'm still looking to put some other people. So, yeah, my son's a drummer. That's it. And so,
Yeah, sure he is.
Oh yeah, okay, sure. All right, whatever. And so I said, yeah, so I'm looking to do this. And so we're talking again. He said, yeah, he my son, he came out of the jazz program at the New School in New York. I said, what? This guy's in Ghana, and he said, yeah, he came out of New School in New York. I said, really? I said, okay, well, he said he plays with this saxophone player, it's on Blue Note right now, Emmanuel Wilkins. He plays drums with. Wait, but man, who's this cat? I said, wait a minute, Kwaku, his name was Kwaku Sombri. I said, man, you got to be kidding me, man.
Small world.
Oh my God! So he said, well, yeah, if you're thinking about a drum, I said, put him in the band now.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. So.
All right. So you got this big tour coming up, which sounds cool. Before I let you go, tell me about the scene in Chicago and how you're navigating that as a player.
Man, Chicago has welcomed me with open arms, mainly due to the fact that everybody knew my father. My father was a pillar in the jazz community here for many decades. And so I knew quite a few musicians here already. Once they found out I was in town, they just said, hey man, can you do this? Can you do that? And I was, within about a couple of weeks of me being here, I started working, incredible jazz community here. It's great musicians. Everybody's very supportive. It's like a scene comparable to New York in a sense where you can either go out to play any night of the week, or you can go out to hear some music any night of the week, and that's what is really conducive to a healthy jazz scene, and all that is right here in Chicago.
That's great. Derrick, I appreciate your time. Have a great tour. Really good to see you as always, man. I wish you the best. Take care.
Thank you, man. Can't wait to hit with you again, too.
All right. Yeah, likewise, man. All right, bro. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Van Doren Reeds and Mouthpieces. Be sure and check out the Van Doren Advisory Studio in New York City for all your sound sculpting needs. Liner Notes is grateful for the support of Arlen's Good Beer in Bowling Green, Ohio. Sound by Marco Mendoza. The theme music is No FOMO, Mofo by yours truly. Produced by David Bixler. Be sure and subscribe to Liner Notes wherever you find your podcasts. If you like what you hear, I ask that you consider supporting Liner Notes financially. You can do this by going to the Liner Notes tab at davidbixler.com. Thank you for your consideration.